In 2017, the Supreme Court ruled on a case, Andrew F. versus Douglas County School District, which will impact our practice as teachers who work with students with autism spectrum disorder. In this presentation, you'll learn about what happened at the case and what you need to know as a teacher moving forward working with children with autism and other disabilities. The first thing you need to know is that this was a case about FAPE, or providing a free, appropriate public education. The previous standard was set by a case called the Raleigh ruling in the 1980s. And the student at the previous case was a student with a hearing impairment who needed an interpreter to access the general curriculum. Since the 1980s, the standard for providing a free appropriate public education aligned with accessing the general curriculum and providing supports children need to benefit academically. When we look at this case, we'll see that this is addressing a different population that was not mentioned in the previous Raleigh ruling, which dictated what we knew as FAPE prior to this ruling. IDEA outlines FAPE as special education and related services that address 4 items. First, that these are provided at the public expense. Next, that they meet the standards set by the state. They include preschool, elementary, and high school, and this ranges from ages 3 to 21. And finally, that students are provided with an individualized education program, or an IEP. Let's look at the facts of the case. The plaintiff, who is referred to throughout the case as Endrew F., was a student diagnosed with autism. He attended his local public school throughout his early elementary years. His parents began to become concerned around 4th or 5th grade that he was making very little progress. Many of his IEP goals throughout the years were identical to previous IEP goals. In 5th grade, Endrew was enrolled in a private school where his parents believed he made large gains both socially, behaviorally, and academically. His parents sought tuition reimbursement because they believed that he was being denied FAPE because he was not making adequate progress in the public schools. The defendant is Douglas County School District. It's one of the largest school districts in Colorado, and it's located right outside of the Denver area. It is said to resemble some of our typical suburban school districts in our area. Judge Roberts delivered the unanimous decision, which ruled in favor of Endrew and his family. A unanimous decision means that all members of the court voted for one particular side, and again, this was the side for Endrew and his parents. Let's see what this decision means. This ruling upheld some of the notions that were set forth in the Raleigh ruling discussed earlier in the presentation. First, it's noted that students must make reasonably calculated progress in order to ensure that FAPE is being provided. It struck down one of the quotes that was listed in the previous rulings, which stated that students need to make merely more than de minimis progress, and that was acceptable. More than de minimis is Latin for the very minimum. Under IDEA, it says that students with disabilities need to have substantial equal opportunities as afforded to those students without disabilities. With that in mind, the new notion set forth by this ruling was that an IEP needs to be reasonably calculated to enable a child to make progress appropriate in light of his circumstances. And this is the new light that's being shed on FAPE. We're now looking at students who are functioning outside of your typical curriculum, who are working on things such as life skills goals, behavioral goals, social goals. So we have now expanded the scope of FAPE to address these individual circumstances. So what does this mean for students, teachers, schools, and school districts? First, it's important to treat the IEP as the cornerstone as a child's educational program. This is what's known as in the ruling as the blueprint to providing a child FAPE. So this really means that we need to emphasize the importance of the IEP and ensure that it's being followed. Schools, districts, and LEAs need to make sure that all IDEA procedures are being followed when a student's IEP is being developed. This means that people need to be familiar with procedural safeguards. I know this is a document that you often hand out to parents prior to meetings or when any information is disseminated related to the IEP. I recommend that you review some of these procedural safeguards. In the resources for this week, there's a short video that explains what rights are outlined in that. I recommend that you check that out. Next, parents should be playing a meaningful role in developing the IEP, and they should be viewed as a vital member of the IEP team. Anything that districts and IEP teams can do to increase a parent role is very important. Assessments provided to students should be meaningful and address all of the student needs. This is where some of the curriculum-based measures that we talked about last week would come in. IEP goals should be ambitious, challenging, measurable, and assessed. Again, this touches on our assessment content that we discussed last week. The special education program should be designed so that a child can make progress, again, in light of their individual circumstances and their particular needs. So this means that you may need to look outside of the traditional academic curriculum to provide an appropriate education for a child. It's also recommended that IEP teams develop and use systematic procedures to make sure that students' progress is being monitored. You want to make sure that parents are provided with reports regularly, and at a minimum, they are provided with updates of progress when report cards are given. Data should be used to determine appropriate instructional changes as needed. And the burden is on the professionals. This is the teachers, the LEA, the special education department, to justify any decisions that they make based on IEP progress. All of these recommendations, 7 through 9, fall on your appropriate use of progress monitoring. Finally, tip number 10 is to stay up to date on legal developments in special education. This is something that I recommend you as practitioners to do. And on the next slide, there are some recommendations for some websites for you to check out. You can follow these sites on social media or join many of their weekly or monthly emails to stay up to date. One of the biggest takeaways, which is nothing new in special education, is to document, document, document. This goes to documenting a parent's participation prior to an IEP meeting and during an IEP meeting, to documenting student progress. This ruling really put a new importance on progress monitoring students outside of the traditional curriculum. So students who are working on goals that are not included in measures that could be used in RTI, we need to find appropriate tools and document those tools and the student performance appropriately. I hope you enjoyed this presentation, and I hope that you take some of these tips back to your school to improve our practice for serving students with autism.